What really makes a marriage work? It's a question for the ages, right? Well, today we're diving into a very specific answer. We're going to look at the principles of an ideal Islamic marriage, all through the lens of the late British Islamic scholar Aisha Lemu, who wrote these two amazing companion books on the subject.
Lemu's entire project really kicked off from this simple but super powerful idea. She looked around and saw that whenever people talked about marriage, the conversation was almost always about what makes the perfect wife. The husband's role kind of got a pass. Her work was all about bringing that conversation back into balance.
So here's our plan for unpacking her vision. First, we'll talk about why she even wrote these books. Then we'll get into the bedrock, the foundation of marriage in Islam. We'll look at the specific roles for each partner, the ultimate role model she points to, how to handle the tough times, because they happen, and we'll wrap up with some really eye-opening survey data she collected.
Okay, first up, redressing the balance. It says so much that Lemu decided to write her book on the ideal Muslim husband before she wrote the one for the wife. And that was totally intentional. She saw that men often expected their wives to be perfect, quoting scripture and all that, but didn't always hold themselves to that same high standard.
Now, the key thing to get here is that this wasn't about blaming men or letting women off the hook. Not at all. Lemu's goal was to build a complete, interdependent system. By shining that spotlight on the husband's duties, she was making sure both partners came to the marriage with an equal and clear understanding of what's expected.
So that leads us right into our second section, the foundation of marriage. What's the whole point of marriage anyway, according to these principles? And how does Lemu suggest you should actually choose a partner?
Lemu really centers her whole definition of marriage on this incredible metaphor from the Quran, the idea that spouses are garments for each other. Wow, that's deep. Think about it. Garments give you comfort, protection, and intimacy, but they also cover your flaws and protect your dignity. It's just a beautiful picture of deep, mutual care.
So how do you find that person who can be your garment? Well, Lemu points to this prophetic advice on what to look for. And yeah, things like wealth, social status, and looks are on the list, but they're all secondary. For both men and women, the absolute #1 top priority, the real key to a lasting marriage, is religious character and just being a good person.
All right, this brings us to section 3, the pillars of the home. This is where Lemu breaks down the different but connected responsibilities that she argues are the very structure of the family.
A super important concept for the husband's role is this term qawwam. As Lemu explains it, this is all about the husband's duty to take full care of his family. And what does that mean? Primarily, it's about providing the essentials: food, clothes, a place to live, and just taking on that overall responsibility for the family's well-being. So you can see how these roles are meant to be complementary, like two pieces of a puzzle. The husband's main job is external, being the provider and protector. The wife's role, described as a shepherd, is more internal, managing the home and raising the kids. The whole model Lemu lays out is about cooperation, not competition.
So what does this actually look like in real life? For that, we turn to section 4, the prophetic model. Again and again, Lemu points to the life of the Prophet Muhammad as the ultimate, living, breathing example of these ideals. The sources Lemu draws from, they paint a picture of a husband who was anything but a distant tyrant. He was actively serving his family, doing chores, even mending his own clothes. He wasn't picky, never complained about the food, and was incredibly empathetic, especially when his wife was feeling sick.
And the way they interacted, it's just as amazing. He wasn't afraid to show his love. He would play and even race with his wife Aisha. And this is so important. He consulted his wives on big, serious issues. There's even a story that shows he let them speak their minds freely to answer back. This was a relationship built on respect, not fear.
But look, let's be real. No marriage is perfect. There are always going to be challenges. So let's get into section 5, navigating marital challenges. Here, Lemu explains the guidance from the texts on how to handle these tough spots, with the focus always on justice and kindness.
Okay, so when it comes to serious conflict, what the source text calls a wife's rebellion against Islamic norms, Lemu outlines a 3-step process from the Quran. Step 1 is a sincere talk, a serious, private discussion. If that doesn't work, step 2 is to stop being intimate. The third and final step mentioned is a physical act, translated as beat her lightly. Now that last step is a heavy one and it needs a lot of context, which Lemu provides immediately.
And this is the absolutely crucial context that Lemu provides. She stresses that the Prophet himself is reported to have hated this practice.
He famously said, "Do not beat Allah's female servants." He never ever struck any of his wives. And he described any such action as being, at most, symbolic, like tapping with a toothbrush, and never ever hard enough to cause pain or leave a mark.
So what if the marriage just can't be saved? Lemu points out that while divorce is seen as the most hateful of all lawful things, if it has to happen, the guiding principle is kindness. The husband keeps providing for his wife during her waiting period, and he's not allowed to take back any gifts he gave her. It's all about separating with fairness and dignity.
And that brings us to our final section. And honestly, it's one of the most fascinating parts. To make her work really relevant, Lemu did the survey back in the early 90s. She asked a group of 35 educated Muslim women what they actually wanted most in a husband.
And the results? Wow, they're so revealing. The number one quality these women wanted, by a long shot, was a partner who was a pious Muslim. Right after that came truthfulness and being a good leader. But then look at what's at the very, very bottom of the list. Good looks, all the way down at number 23, and wealth, dead last.
And this chart just makes it crystal clear, doesn't it? In her scoring system, piety and character got 49 points from the women she surveyed. Wealth? It got a measly 4. That is a huge statement about prioritizing a person's inner character over their bank account, and it perfectly matches that prophetic advice we talked about earlier.
So we want to leave you with this question to think about. In a world that so often shouts about wealth, status, and looks, how do these priorities, which were recorded in the 90s but are based on texts from centuries ago, challenge what we assume makes an ideal partner today? Something to think about.